Watching the news in English is a great way to improve your English. Unfortunately, they often use some very difficult vocabulary, some idioms, and those pesky English verbs when they talk about the news. Don't worry. In today's English lesson, we will watch a news clip and then I will come back and teach all of the difficult vocabulary they use. Today's news story is about how Americans are already voting for president, even though election day is still more than a week away. Yeah, over 17 million Americans have already voted for president. We call it early voting, and there are a couple ways you can do it. Let's take a look at the clip, and then I will come back and teach you some English.
Coverage even with the election 2 weeks away. In much of the country, early voting has already started, including here in Maine. More than 17 million Americans have already cast their ballots, shattering records in a lot of states.
Before we get into this first word, can I ask you to please like this video? And if this is your first time here, go ahead and subscribe so you never miss another English lesson. Cast is the first word. And I'm not going to lie, this is a very difficult word because we use it about 10 different ways in English. But in the news story, they used it like this: to officially place your vote in an election. And for each of these terms, I will have a picture, I will have the official definition, and I will use it in a sentence. Before we get to that sentence, just one more way we use cast in English. Let's say you break your leg, maybe they broke their ankle, I'm not sure, but that person in the picture is wearing a cast. It will help your bones heal. Let's use cast with elections in a sentence below. Americans have already cast their votes through early voting. Another term they use in the news is ballot. Ballot. That is a form or piece of paper used to record a vote. Voters use a ballot to choose their preferred candidate in the election. Don't worry. If you don't know what preferred is, they are going to use it in the newscast, and we will talk about it a little later.
Coverage even with the election 2 weeks away. In much of the country, early voting has already started, including here in Maine. More than 17 million Americans have already cast their ballots, shattering records in a lot of states.
Shattering records. With 17 million people already voting in the election, this has never happened before. Whatever the old record was for early voting, that is done. That record has been shattered. Shattering records means to break previous achievements or numbers by a large amount. It does appear that the earth is getting warmer, and where I live, it seems like each summer is hotter than the last. A couple times a summer, we will shatter the record for highest temperature. Let's say the record for June 21st in my state was 91 degrees Fahrenheit. Yeah, we use Fahrenheit here in the United States. But maybe on that same day, we break the record. It reaches 92 degrees. It is a new high for temperature. Early voting this year is shattering records across many states. Almost every state in the United States does allow for voting before Election Day. We will talk about my state, Maine, in just a little bit. Did you hear a person sneeze in the background while the reporter was talking?
Coverage even with the election 2 weeks away. In much of the country, early voting has already started, including here in Maine. More than 17 million Americans have already cast their ballots, shattering records in a lot of states.
They don't say sneeze in the newscast, but they do actually sneeze. So let's talk about what that means. The sudden expulsion of air from the nose and mouth, usually due to an irritation in the nasal passage. Wow, very difficult words there, right? An irritation might be like an itch inside your nose. That's your nasal passage. And just like the woman in the picture, you may have to sneeze. Let's take a look at a sentence that uses sneeze. It's important to cover your mouth when you sneeze at a polling station. A polling station is just the place where you vote. They also use so far in that newscast. Let's talk about what that means. Up to the present moment. So far, in this English lesson, we have talked about 5 new terms. So far, more than 1 million people have voted early in Georgia. And Georgia is a very important swing state. We will talk about what that is a little later.
Audrey Elnershow reports on who's voted so far and what it means for the presidential candidates.
For millions of voters, Election Day is already here.
Just in case you don't speak Spanish or Portuguese, aqui. I saw that in the newscast. I just wanted to let you know what that means in Spanish. It was probably in Spanish at the voting place. There are a lot of Americans who speak Spanish, but aqui is the Spanish word for here. I'm not even going to pretend I can pronounce that sentence.
For millions of voters, Election Day is already here.
I just wanted to be out here early so I can get my vote in.
Many state and local election officials were expecting high turnout, but not this high. Even in North Carolina, still recovering from Hurricane Helene.
They mention Southern in the newscast, so let's talk about what that means when we talk about the United States. In the red, you can see where the southern part of the United States is. Yeah, I know. There's parts of California and Arizona that are really far south, but we would probably call those states the West. The official definition of Southern, referring to the southern part of a country or region. States in the southern U.S., like Georgia and North Carolina, are seeing high early voting turnout. High turnout. What does that mean, you might be asking? Well, they talk about it in the newscast. I just mentioned it in a sentence. Let's talk about it now. A large number of people participating in an event, like voting. Election officials, those are people who are in charge of the election. Election officials are reporting a high turnout of early voters.
Many state and local election officials were expecting high turnout, but not this high. Even in North Carolina, still recovering from Hurricane Helene.
2020 was a record for us on the first day of in-person early voting, and now we've broken that record.
Georgia also shattering turnout records. As of Tuesday afternoon, almost 1.8 million early and absentee ballots had been cast.
We have a couple different ways that you can vote in the United States. Let's talk about this first one, in person. Doing something physically present at the location, not virtually. Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't think there is any state in the United States that allows people to vote virtually. You have to be in a polling station, or you can vote absentee, which we will talk about in just a minute. I live in the state of Maine, and we have different rules for voting than a lot of other states. Each state handles their voting rules in a different way, but let's talk about my state. In Maine, early voting lets people vote before Election Day. Voters can go to a town office or city hall to fill out a ballot, just like on Election Day. This helps people avoid long lines and ensures they have a chance to vote, even if, let me hide my picture, even if they're busy on the regular day. And the regular day, Election Day in 2024, is November 5th. It is always the first Tuesday of November. We've been talking a lot about early voting, so let's just get the official definition. Voting before the official election day. Early voting has allowed millions to cast their ballots before election day. That sentence uses a lot of our new vocabulary. Hopefully you understood all of that, or just about all of that.
2020 was a record for us on the first day of in-person early voting, and now we've broken that record.
Georgia also shattering turnout records. As of Tuesday afternoon, almost 1.8 million early and absentee ballots had been cast, making up almost 25% of active Georgia voters.
I have already mentioned absentee voting in this English lesson. Let's get the definition. A way of voting where you send your ballot by mail because you can't be there in person. Many voters use absentee ballots when they can't make it to the polls on election day.
2020 was a record for us on the first day of in-person early voting, and now we've broken that record.
Georgia also shattering turnout records. As of Tuesday afternoon, almost 1.8 million early and absentee ballots had been cast, making up almost 25% of active Georgia voters. By law, the state can't start counting votes until 7 a.m. on election day, but we do know more than 55% have been cast by women. In another critical swing state, Pennsylvania, more than 1 million ballots had been cast as of Tuesday afternoon.
The way we vote for president is very weird. We use something called an electoral college. Each state gets a different amount of votes based on how many people live in that state. California, our biggest state, gets something like 55 votes. My little state of Maine only gets 4 votes. My state almost always votes Democrat, and so does California. Another big state, Texas, almost always votes Republican. But there are some states that might vote Republican in one election, but then vote Democrat in the next election. That's what we call a swing state, and they are super important for electing a president. Let's get the official definition. A state that is very important in deciding the outcome of an election because it can vote either way. You will hear a lot about Pennsylvania, Georgia, Wisconsin. Those are some critical swing states. States with a big population, but also could vote either Democrat or Republican. And whichever candidate gets the most votes in the state gets all of the electoral votes. They don't get to split these electoral votes. Well, in case you want to know, there are 2 states that do split their votes. My state of Maine and Nebraska, but the other states, it's a winner take all kind of situation. California's 55 electoral votes, I am going to guarantee they are going to go to Kamala Harris. But Pennsylvania, it has a couple big cities you might have heard of, Pittsburgh and Philadelphia. Sometimes they vote Democratic, sometimes they vote Republican. Pennsylvania, a U.S. state that often plays a key role in presidential elections. Pennsylvania has already seen over 1 million early ballots cast.
And as expected, about 2/3 have come from Democrats.
Democrats, I think, always turn out in higher numbers just because they've always been encouraged to do so. They've always been encouraged to come out for early voting, to cast an absentee ballot.
As expected is the next one, and that means something that happens the way people thought it would. As expected, more Democrats are voting early this year. Yeah, in the news clip, they say that Democrats often vote early because they are encouraged to do so, but this year, even Republicans are doing some of that early voting.
Democrats, I think, always turn out in higher numbers just because they've always been encouraged to do so. They've always been encouraged to come out for early voting, to cast an absentee ballot.
Whereas Republicans in 2020 sowed doubt in the process.
I just used encouraged. The news clip uses encouraged. Let's talk about what that means. To be motivated or advised to do something. Let's take a look at that picture. It looks like a father is encouraging his daughter to jump off the diving board. He looks like he is very supportive. As an English teacher, I encourage you to study your English every day. And if you have made it this far in the English lesson, hey, nice job. I know learning English can be very difficult. We are talking about some very difficult words in this English lesson. Voters are encouraged to participate in early voting to avoid long lines on election day. Ooh, so doubt. So doubt. That is how that is pronounced. In a minute, we will talk about a sow, but this is to sow doubt. Take a look at that father now. He doesn't look so happy. He doesn't look so sure about what his daughter is about to do. Maybe he has a little doubt. Let's talk about what sow doubt means. To create uncertainty or mistrust in something, you make people not believe it. I have no doubt that your English is going to improve by the end of this English lesson, but doubt means you're just not sure of something. Some politicians sow doubt in the election process by questioning mail-in voting. In the past, I think it's more Republican leaders that have said, hey, I don't know if we can trust early voting. I don't know if we can trust absentee voting or mail-in voting. Absentee and mail-in voting is pretty much the same thing. Now, this is a sow. Those two words are pronounced differently, even though I know they are spelled the same way. What is a sow? It's a female pig. This is unrelated to voting. I just wanted to show you how we can have two words in English spelled the same way but pronounced very differently. That's English for you. Farmers raise sows for breeding purposes. Yeah, so they can have more little piglets running around. That's what we call baby pigs, piglets.
Whereas Republicans in 2020 sowed doubt in the process. After losing the White House, the GOP now encourages all types of voting.
Whether you vote early, absentee, by mail, or in person, we are going to protect the vote.
The GOP, you will hear this quite a lot when you're watching the news about elections. GOP stands for Grand Old Party. It's another name for the Republican Party. The GOP has been promoting early voting this election cycle. I have mentioned this in earlier English lessons, but just in case you don't know, the mascot for Democrats is a donkey, and the mascot for Republicans is an elephant.
It's way too early to make any sort of, judgments about what this means for either candidate. But I do think that, promoting it would help both parties.
The 2020 pandemic era election was the first in American history where the majority of voters did not cast their ballots in person on election day.
Public reaction. The way people respond to news or events. In the picture, it looks like those people are reacting by protesting. The public reaction to early voting numbers has been very positive. Judgment. To make decisions or form opinions. I hope when you speak English, nobody judges your accent. That would be very unfair. Hopefully they only are encouraging you to speak more. It's too early to make a judgment about how early voting will affect the outcome. Because remember, those votes are coming in, but election officials are not allowed to count them yet. Promoting. To talk about something publicly. I think Republicans are promoting early voting in this election for the first time. Promoting also means to say people should do something. Right now, I will promote my members area. There is a link in the description if you want bonus lessons. It just costs a couple dollars a month, but there are over 100 bonus English lessons in the members area. Both parties are promoting early voting as a convenient option. If something is convenient, it makes your life easier. I hope these English lessons are convenient for you. You can watch them from pretty much anywhere. Maybe you are in bed studying your English. Maybe you are on break at work. Or maybe you're commuting home from a long workday. Maybe you are on a bus. I hope it's very convenient for you to learn English here on this channel. The majority. That means more than half. Official definition. More than half of a group, more than 50%. The majority of voters are expected to cast their ballots on election day. Yeah, I find it easier just to go on election day cast my vote. I usually don't have to wait in line all that long, maybe 5 or 10 minutes. It's pretty close to my house. In fact, it's on the way home from my work. It's very convenient for me.
The 2020 pandemic era election was the first in American history where the majority of voters did not cast their ballots in person on Election Day. Since then, many have come to prefer the convenience of voting early, but based on turnout so far, in-person Election Day voting will be the main event.
I mentioned prefer. That means to like one thing better than another. So maybe you prefer learning English on YouTube rather than going to a class in person. Many voters prefer to vote early rather than wait until Election Day. Convince. Let's take a look at the picture first. In the picture, well, there is a piece of pizza floating in the air. I'm not sure why AI drew it like that, but I did ask AI, hey, create an image of one brother trying to convince his other brother that pineapple on pizza is okay. The brother in the blue shirt looks like he's trying to convince his other brother. I don't think the other brother is buying it. Look at his arms are folded. I don't think he likes pineapple on pizza. But let's look at the official definition for convince. To persuade. Persuade and convince are synonyms. To persuade someone to do or believe something. The campaign worked hard to convince people to vote early. Yeah, you try to make somebody do something. Maybe you can convince your friends to start learning English with me. Yeah, I would be very happy if you shared this English lesson with some of your friends who are also learning English. The main event. You will often hear this with boxing. It's like the last match of the night, the big thing that people went to the boxing match for. There might have been a couple other boxing matches, but maybe they weren't as important as the last one. So here we go. Definition: the most important or central part of an activity. Even though early voting is popular, Election Day remains the main event. The majority of people will cast their vote on Election Day. That's it. We're done. Congratulations, you made it to the end. If you're looking for more English lessons, like right down there is an English lesson I did about Donald Trump joining a podcast by Joe Rogan. Thanks so much for watching. See you next time.